rise for the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Under announcements this evening, first I'd like to wish Paul Payne from the transfer station some get well wishes. He's under the weather, we'll say, and to let him know that we are thinking about him. Also remind residents that the PACE loans are available now. If you're interested in more information, there's information pasted on the town's website, and you can also come into Town Hall, and we're starting to have some of the literature now about the PACE loans that's available to pick up. Under appointments this evening, we're starting at 6 p.m. with a presentation of our energy audit by Lassel Architecture. And Frank, is Tom right there? Do you see him? Yeah. Oh, thank you, Frank. At town meeting, there was some monies appropriated to conduct an energy audit, and we focused on 4 of the buildings in town: the old town hall, the town hall annex, the library, and the South Fire Station. Lassel Architects of Southburg was hired to perform the audit. They have 22 years of experience working with schools, municipal, and private sector work. And they came recommended by the state. And before they sit down, I'm going to call them right up. Oh. No rest. So this evening we have with us Mike and Daniela from Lassel, and they're here to present the energy audit to us. So good evening. Thank you for joining us. And with that, I'll turn it over to you for a presentation of the audit.
Thank you. Well, you've all received a copy of it, I'm sure, right?
Yes.
And you know, what we did was, we did a
Could I ask you to step
Oh, sure.
up to the microphone, please?
Sure. Oh, I see, yeah, over there it's on, right? Okay, good. What we've done, we put a PowerPoint together so we can kind of walk through the, you know, the report, you know, so we can all look at it together.
And basically, we basically started off with asking for utility information from the town, and just to get an idea of how much you're using currently, and to compare the buildings between, basically an idea of how's the old town hall doing, how's the annex doing, the south station, as well as the library, and our goal is basically save electricity, heating, hot water fuels, make sure that it's a safe, comfortable building. And I'm actually going to as well, really make sure that indoor air quality is talked about as well. And I'm not sure, should I just say when to go to the next piece? Are you in charge of this? Okay. You can go to the next slide. And that just an overview. And what we ended up doing is we just did an overview of the mechanical systems, which will give you kind of the red flags of what to really look into.
Just to let you know, a full energy audit on the mechanical, electrical side by the engineers was another $20,000. We had gone out and asked for those pricing, and we just couldn't do that, you know. So we came back and said, you know, what is it that the town really needs? The town really needs an unblemished look at all the facilities. And then using, you know, the technology that we have, blower door tests and infrared cameras, and, you know, our knowledge of doing, you know, energy efficient buildings for the past 20 years, you know, and so we, you know, we've worked with our engineers a little bit. We called them up and said, how does this and this work, to make sure that we're in line here. So we have an overview of what the systems are in each building, how they function, and what the issues are. And the goal really is to help you sort of formulate a capital improvements plan that makes some sense. It gives you direction. And then you can decide on what you think the most important things are and what you can afford in time. And so this whole process here should culminate then in you knowing, all right, we have to do these things right here, and then, these are things we should plan for in the near future and the long term. Because some of these will have shorter paybacks, others will have much longer paybacks. And to be kind of brutally frank, all these buildings have been built during times when energy was not an issue. They were all built in times when energy costs were not an issue in the building construction trades. They were built based upon old standards, and they don't really reflect the way you build buildings today. So I think you'd have to understand that as we work through that. I think you looking at the report, you see that. And then as we work our way through there, you begin to understand that more and more.
You can go to the next slide, please. So starting off with the Old Town Hall, I'll just kind of briefly go through it. I know you all have the report, so I don't want to let me know if I'm taking too much time, but just to get an overview of the plan. You can go to the next slide, and if we need to, we can go back for reference if there's questions. This is just a graph of the energy usage currently, about half electricity, half heating. It really depends. Your other buildings didn't quite look the same way, and it often depends on the building usage, but here you can see that there is a lot of opportunity for savings in the electrical, and just from looking at the building as well in terms of heating. This also had a fairly, in terms of BTUs per square foot, if you look at the average building, yes, this is about average, but that's more of what Mike was saying in terms of it's reflecting that our buildings in this region really are not built to the standards, the way they should be. You can go to the next slide. And this is in the basement. This is an important view right here. You do have an insulated floor between your basement, your unheated basement, basically. This basement foundation wall is not insulated, and then you have your insulation here between the floors, but then all of your heating pipes basically run from the boiler underneath the insulation through the cold basement and then up through the spaces, and that's it's kind of keeping your basement warm, but that's not really where you really need it. And so pipe insulation is a big thing here. Also, this insulation plane is not currently doing a whole lot of good because there are a lot of gaps, especially around the perimeter. The perimeter is also uninsulated. There's basically like a 1'10" gap between the insulation and the floor above, and then all the outside is uninsulated. You also have a hot water tank, 40-gallon, that is for, I think, 2 sinks in there, which is oversized for the usage, and that's definitely something that should be looked at.
You can see in the infrared image on the right, the dark areas are where you have heat loss.
Yeah, so basically, the darker it is, the colder it is,
Right.
and you can kind of look at the temperature. There's a little temperature gradient here that gives an approximate temperature, so 74 degrees versus 29 degrees. That's a pretty big gradient to have in an interior space. You can go to the next slide. So basically, one of the big things we talked about in this report is basement insulation would be a good idea, and there are different ways to do it. This is the ideal way to do it. This is spray foam insulation with a stud wall and gypsum wall board. We understand this is more expensive, and I basically outlined 3 options. So you can do closed cell foam, rigid insulation, or a vinyl covered fiberglass bat, which doesn't perform as well as the closed cell foam, but it would still give you some insulation, and that's something that definitely some of these things, we outlined it, and it's a good idea to talk to contractors, look at the different costs, and make a decision, an informed decision from there.
If you look at this section right here, essentially you have a concrete wall that has no insulation on the inside or outside. And so if you have a 0 degrees outside, inside the concrete wall can be as 10 to 15 degrees. That concrete has an R maybe of 1. So if you look at a typical building, other than the infiltration coming in from the doors and windows, if you block that out, where do buildings lose their energy? Typically, the foundations is a huge energy loss. And how that works is that it's essentially a cold radiator. That cold goes down the side of that wall, down another 3 feet or 4 feet before it becomes below the frost line. So you've got an area that's 4 or 5 feet that essentially is acting as a big radiator, allowing all the warm air to be sucked out of the building. Now, how does that work? It works like this. Energy is all radiant energy. So you could be standing away from this wall here, and that cold would draw the energy from you. And that's what's happening with this building here. So the whole perimeter of the building is essentially acting as an energy sponge and taking it outside. So if you look at a building, the roof or the attic space and the foundation walls can attribute up to 60% of the energy loss in a building, those two areas. And in some cases where you've got a lot of exposed foundation, that can be a 30 to 40% number right there. So it's truly amazing where the energy actually goes out of a building.
And another important thing to note here is these are multi-story buildings, and with the multi-story buildings, the air sealing at the bottom, at the basement, and in the attic are both very important because you end up with a stack effect. So basically, the taller chimney is, the more the air moves through that chimney. Same thing in a building. If you have small holes and little gaps at the bottom near the basement as well as in the attic, that air will move through and it'll basically suck in cold air from below, and then the warm air will escape through the top. So that's why we basically detail these measures the way that we do to really and stress that, but air sealing is very important. You can go to the next slide. And here are just some more images that we took with the infrared scanner. For instance, you have some through-wall air conditioners, and you can see that even, this was a very cold day, but there were actually freezing temperatures inside the building because you have these holes through your wall, and these are in the old town hall. And then we did discover that this office, the rec office, this area over here, is over here actually, and there's no insulation in there because there's a staircase behind it. So that's meant to be interior space, but that also wasn't heated, so that's just a colder space in that office. And as far as, okay, insulating that little area, is it going to give you this cost versus benefit? Maybe that's not going to pay off right away, but it is a comfort issue, and it's a good thing to note. So if you are doing some insulation work in that building, that's a good point there to note and improve. I'm sure people that work in the office would appreciate the added comfort.
Yeah, this
So
I like the cold.
here is the gym, and this is an infrared image of the gym. You saw that in the report. This shows, and I don't have a way of knowing what exactly that insulation looks like in there, if it's just fallen
If it's cellulose
insulation
or if it's fiberglass insulation, we didn't doing destructive testing.
But you know, there's definitely a lot of heat loss around there. And then go to the next slide.
The dark areas in that slide, by the way, are once again areas that are missing insulation, or you've got air movement in the wall. The stack effect, if you can imagine that the tall chimney will draw air faster. So if you've got pinholes or holes in the bottom of the wall and some at the top, you know, where it's exposed in the attic, and you get air moving across there, it's like a straw. When you blow a straw, how it draws the water up, the same thing happens here. The stack effect is like a tall chimney. When the wind blows, it'll draw that fire right up through it. The same thing happens here in little tiny sections. So the physics behind a wall assembly is like this. In order for insulation to work correctly, the way it's designed to work, it has to fill the cavity up from stud to stud, friction fit, and then from sheetrock to outside sheathing without any gaps. It has to fill that void up 100%. And bad insulation, you know, you've probably seen it, always just curls in, it's broken up, there's lines going through it. It essentially says R19, but it's probably like an R8. It's probably performing at half that level. And when you see big gaps like that in there, it's maybe even performing at 1/3 of what the design performance is. That's why you see a lot of cellulose being used or blown insulation. which addresses that concern. So what happens is you have then those little gaps in the insulation, and you have air moving through the insulation stud, the stud section, and that essentially is eroding all of the value of that insulation itself. So it becomes almost worthless. And as soon as you have gaps in there, it becomes even more worthless, because through the convection process, when air goes into convection, it loses its energy. And insulation works by not allowing air to move. So if any convection or air movement in that stud bay, that destroys the value of that stud bay. So just to let you know what you're looking at here.
Which is why using caulking around the bottom and top of walls is very a good method as well, and it's something where you don't have to be as invasive sometimes. This is more pictures. This right here is the little loft area in the gym, so this shows probably no insulation in that area whatsoever. This right here is actually an inside wall, and the reason this is so dark and there's a lot of heat loss is because there's the attic space, I think it's been referred to as the bat cave by various people, is up here, and there are just big gaps in the exterior sheathing of the original, the gym hall, and then you can kind of see on the other side where that attic was added, there's no insulation or air sealing done, and it just, there's a lot of heat loss here. The insulation doesn't really probably lie flat. Then you have the timbers to contend with. It's difficult to kind of make fiberglass bats, which are rectangular, fit in between those areas. So, and another thing too in the gym is that the ceiling is, it's kind of a tongue and groove. And I didn't observe any vapor barrier, but we're talking about air sealing being important. So there's a lot of air moving through the fiberglass bat insulation up at the top, which is, again, degrading the value. So there's definitely a lot of insulation that can be done, especially along the edges, like here. And this is actually where that image is taken here. That's the same as that. So you can go to the next slide. And this is the attic up above. And so, I mean, all of these gaps, they do make a difference. And then areas of importance are air sealing around chimneys. There's details. You can see that in the appendix. I just provided some details from the building science folks down in Massachusetts. They do a really good job of just making sure it's clear. And there's also just, if you look at the insulation up here, there's a lot of debris laying on it. It's disturbed a lot. I don't know if it's from animals or just over years, over years of use. And that, again, degrades the value. So the damaged insulation should be taken out. The debris should be taken out. And the standard nowadays really is an R49 in attics. And it does, if you look at that, that's one of the things that we were calculating in terms of return on investment. And because in open attics you can blow in insulation fairly easily, you need to make sure that you put blocking up so that you don't, it doesn't come down in areas, but that payback is within 5 years. And so that's something that we would recommend to focus on.
If you just look at the pictures, every time you have, you know, the next one too, Tom, right here, you see the horizontal wood right there. Mm-hmm. In between the insulation and each one of those lower cords right there, the truss, air is moving through there because it's not sealed tight. So even if you think it looks tight, if it has a gap like this in there, air is moving through there. And the air is moving into the attic. And that warm air in the attic, you know, contributes to essentially, ice damming because the attic is so warm. And also, it degrades the value, once again, of the insulation. Every time you have a gap in insulation, if it's butting up to each other, and air moving through there, that takes that area of the insulation, degrades its value.
And this right here is your bat cave. And this is the area I was talking about where there's a lot of gaps in that exterior wall where you can see the cold air just moving through. And this is looking towards the offices. This door is just a regular interior door. There's no weather stripping or anything, and it could be helped with some more sealing. And there's just a lot of the fiberglass bats have just fallen down, and there's definitely some improvements that can be made there. And again, because this is the attic, the tallest point of the building, where you end up having more pressure differential, which basically causes more heat loss. Those attic areas are very important to focus on, and that's a good investment to really pay attention to those spaces. And this is the attic above the offices, and that it has fairly minimal fiberglass insulation, so that would benefit from getting another layer of cellulose over top and really bringing it up to code. You can go to the next slide. And a big thing too, especially in the old town hall, is T12 light fixtures with magnetic ballasts. And so there are actually incentives from Efficiency Maine, which are quite attractive to upgrade, and you can get 35, sometimes even 40% of savings. And even if you're using that fixture consistently, it can be up to $20 per year for savings in terms of electricity. And T8s provide a better light. They're more efficient. You can usually reduce the number of lamps. This has 4 lamps in here. You can usually reduce it to 2. That's also less maintenance, less changing out of bulbs, etc. So, and this is just a summary. So, big things again: insulating hot water pipes, upgrading the insulation, and especially the attic. And I know that, so the windows I know have been a discussion point. It's because windows are so expensive, it's often harder to say, all right, this payback is going to be beneficial right away, but because they are fairly leaky in terms of air sealing, it probably would be definitely a good thing to look at least get some cost quotes and see where you end up with that.
And if you do that, you need to look at the proper windows, because I mean you can buy these same windows again and have the same problems again 5 or 10 years from now. So they do make really good windows, good replacement windows that do have a 10 and 20-year warranty period with them. They have good glass, good seals, and good parts to them. And you know, that's always, we see this often the case is that somebody decided to save a little bit of money for the first cost, and they wind up having then that cost they pay for it every single day. And the initial cost sometimes is a little bit higher, but it pays itself off with usually 3 to 5 years.
And another big thing is, I did ask about temperature settings, and there is I know that most people are very good about setting down the temperatures when the building is not in use, and just really stressing that. And I put a note in there about putting out a little newsletter, or just what it is that you're trying to do in terms of becoming more energy efficient. I think we all use these buildings, and it's good to have an aware user that basically says, oh, I'm going to switch this light off, and I'm going to turn this down when I'm leaving. And because especially the temperature settings at night make a huge difference. You don't want to be heating your building to 75, 80 degrees when you're not there. And that's where programmable thermostats are really great, because it just takes that thought process out of it. It's just automatic, but that's definitely an important piece. And yeah, that's that. And you can maybe go to the next piece. And the annex. So here we are in the annex, and what we heard when we went through here is that there seems to be some trouble with some of these offices at the end not getting warm enough in the winter, not getting cool enough in the summer, and the big culprit appears to be that the whole mechanical system is in your unregulated attic space. So you basically, and you can go to the next slide, I think. And actually, this is just so that you have a baseline of what you're currently using. This is actually surprisingly low in comparison to the heating, or the heating is surprisingly high for your usage. And you can go to the next. So basically, this is your attic, and you have your insulation at the attic floor, and then your whole distribution system and mechanical systems are up above that. And yes, the ductwork is insulated. However, when it's as cold as it gets around here in the winter time, you know, your warm air moves through these ducts and through these hot water pipes, and by the time it gets to the end of the building, to the back offices, it's lost temperature. And there's also, you know, there were a few little gaps in the insulation, the pipe insulation. Most of it was done fairly okay, but there can be some improvements. And so we looked at that, and ideally what you would do is you would basically create an insulated shell around the whole distribution system. I mean, that...
Yeah, good practice has always been to put all your mechanical systems, you know, in a heated space. It's pretty much never been the practice of putting mechanical systems in the attic. It'd be like putting your kitchen in the attic and you go there and cook your meals. It's pretty cold. So you can imagine you have your boiler downstairs in the back. That's a very efficient boiler. It's producing hot water. It's sending hot water way upstairs into the attic. Now the attic is uninsulated, so you can stand up there, because if it's 0 outside, it's going to be 0 almost inside. And so you have then an air changer up there, which is taking that water, which has been heated now, putting it through an air exchanger, and then putting it through ducts that have you know, maybe 1/2 inch or 3/4 inch insulation around that, and pushing it, you know, almost 50 feet. So by the time it gets to the end of that 1 inch of insulation around that duct in a 0-degree temperature or 5-degree temperature, well, it's actually much warmer there because all the heat's rising in there.
Which is why you have
It's actually a very warm space because all the heat is being lost. And so you have the heat in there, which is a product of all the energy being lost in that unregulated space because the insulation is down at the ceiling line. So you have the insulation, which is allowing air to move from the first floor up into the upper space. And then you have all the equipment up there, all the ductwork, all the plumbing up there, which is also giving off heat. So the space up there is almost as warm as it is down here. So now you have the snow on top of the roof, and it's melting underneath there, and that water is running down to the eaves, which are unheated, and then you get your ice dams. So that's the real issue right here.
And we were told that the ice dams have to be broken off multiple times during the winter time, and it's your distribution system up here. And the other unfortunate part too with this kind of a system is that everywhere where you have these feeds into your spaces, you again have these, you know, areas around it that need to be air sealed ideally, because this is another gap where warm air can escape up into the attic through the fiberglass and out the window, unfortunately. So we looked at, okay, what can we do if we spray foam the underside of the roof, which is ideal in terms of energy efficiency. That is unfortunately very expensive. So the payback, and we were kind of looking at a rough kind of percentage of distribution losses of this being in the attic. And so it came out to about 20 to 30 years, and it really depends on the cost of fuel, and it depends on, it's cost of fuel and really that price of the investment. I was doing a square footage takeoff, and so 20 to 30 year payback is kind of a hard thing to really push. So we looked at, okay, well, you can upgrade the attic insulation and maybe improve some of the distribution system insulation, some of the ductwork and air sealing, and that came out to more of a 6-year payback. Which
creating a room, insulated room where the air handler is. Because right now the air handler is in the open space. It's unregulated, so the air handler is getting the warm water. It has minimal insulation around it. It's obviously designed for this type of use. It hasn't been frozen up yet, but you can imagine the heat loss across that. And you can build a room around that and enclose that and then insulate that. In the perfect world, how would you solve this? The perfect world, you would probably say, well, we're going to, when we re-roof the building, take the shingles off and go on top of the insulation on top of the roof. You know, if you put the insulation on top of the roof, you know, you put 4 to 6 inches of rigid insulation, isothermal insulation, you re-shingle on top of that. You know, that would give you then an unobstructed, sort of, with no thermal breaks within that whole roof membrane. And that would be the ideal. Then the roof is set, then you would probably take, you know, our mechanical engineers then said, we'll take the insulation out of the ceiling space and become one larger space. You're heating one larger volume. But you're doing that right now. You're heating really this space here and also the attic space. So if you can imagine, you're double heating the spaces in here. And there's 2 goals of that. One is to, you know, you want to reduce the volume of this heat, which is that insulation plane up in here, and then take all of the equipment up above and then try to find a way of super insulating that and then preventing heat loss at every point. And the point is that when they cut these open right here, there's little gaps all around like this right here. And when you start to add up all the gaps that go between the heated space and then the unheated space, outside space, it becomes like a couple of windows. I bet if you added up all the openings in this building here, we would probably be like having 2 or 3 windows open in the wintertime. You know, just to give you maybe a couple of doors, just to give you an idea of how this all adds up. It sounds like it's just small little things, but you add up the square footage throughout the entire building and the gaps and everything else, and it's pretty quick, you know, a good-sized opening.
And you
So,
were saying that spraying the ceiling or the roof has a 30-year payback.
20 to 30
Okay,
year, and
all
it
right.
really
How
depends.
would the cost and payback be of taking shingles off and putting 4 inches of insulation, what you said on that?
It would probably be fairly similar, and the question is to how old is your roof? I think that your roof is fairly new, probably 2001, right
Yes.
around there. So it still has a fair amount of years left.
You mentioned re-shingling. I think I don't see a scenario where these roofs don't get done and are not metal. I mean, we've got safety issues, and can you still do that with a
Oh,
metal?
sure,
Right.
absolutely. We, you know, as a
I
matter
mean,
of fact,
that's a $40,000 project.
as a matter of fact, you know, a lot of the rooms we're doing right now, we're doing a large medical facility for York Hospital right now. And what we're doing is the roof construction is we're doing a steel shell that basically has all the dormers and gables. And on top of that, we're putting 10 inches of rigid insulation. It's essentially a panelized system, and on top it has a plywood, and sandwiched in between there is insulation. And these span up to 10 feet. And that way there are no thermal breaks where the air, where you know you have a stud or a rafter that can poke through. Because the rafter, if it's a 2x6 rafter, it has maybe an R5 across that. Where your insulation then has maybe an R40. So every time there's a rafter, you have then a thermal break where it drops down, you lose your efficiency. So we're doing that there, we're shingling on top of that, and we're also putting some metal in a few areas. So that's kind of a state-of-the-art method of construction. You know the Curie trading post? That's all panelized roof system. When you look at the big trusses up there, they're 10 feet apart, center to center. We have also, I think, 12-inch panels there. We have 12-inch thick panels on top of that, across the whole top of that roof. Because that was really designed as a high-performance building. And so those are some options. I think what's key is to sort of think it all through and say what makes sense for you and what makes sense in the long term.
And the other thing too, if you're asking about the roof, if there's ice damming, you're really degrading how long that roof will last. And I don't know if you've had a lot of moisture issues with that so far, but that might be something to kind of look at. I can't say, you know, it's going to be this many years if you do this. I didn't do a takeoff in terms of the roof cost in there as well. That's the big thing why we kind of looked at interior insulation, because we said, all right, to demo the roof, to put a new roof in, that's going to be extra. But the thing is, it's always good to weigh the other aspects too. It's not just energy efficiency, it's also the, you know, maintenance of the building, making sure that it doesn't leak, safety, making sure people don't have to get up on the roof and knock the icicles off. So there's these other benefits as well. And there's just, this is along an outside edge.
There's a question over here.
Yeah, I'm a contractor. I've been a contractor for 40 years in town, and I've used a lot of this new fiberglass blown-in insulation.
The bid system.
Yeah,
Right.
and it really expands tremendously, really quickly. I mean, you can blow 4 feet of insulation in an attic in a hurry at a very minimal expense compared to ripping off a roof and going to a much larger expense. You could put almost 4 feet of insulation in that attic.
But that's not the issue, though. The issue is all the mechanical equipment and ductwork in the attic. The
Well,
issue,
some of that ductwork that I was seeing there is probably 2 feet off the floor, off the ceiling.
and you could cover that up.
And you could cover the whole thing right up with 4 feet of insulation, a lot more economically than ripping off a roof and putting 10 feet of styrofoam and re-shingling a metal roof on top of this building.
And that's an option also, you know, and I think, you know, I think we put together several scenarios. We said go back in and insulate all the ductwork that's exposed up high, build an enclosure around the heating unit up there to condition that, and then put in, you know, the appropriate amount of insulation and go over top of that. I've done that a lot. We, you know, 10, 15 years ago, right, I convinced clients to do super insulated buildings. And we have, they put ductwork in the attic, and I do allow that, but I say, okay, if you put over top of that with 2 feet of insulation, you know, the blown-in insulation, the bib system or the cellulose,
Yeah.
then essentially you put that within the building envelope. The whole idea is to have your heating within the building envelope. As soon as you put outside the envelope, then you've lost its effectiveness and its efficiency.
And what you're talking about, that's more of the 6-year payback. That you're
Right, that's
talking
our
And, and also, I'm not opposed to cellulose, but cellulose settles more than the blown-in fiberglass, and when the more air you have between your fiberglass, the better insulation value you have, you know. And if you can put, if you put 4 feet of cellulose up there, it would be 2 feet in about 4 years, whereas your blown-in fiberglass stays very fluffy, has no weight to it, so it doesn't settle so much, and also has less apt to have rodents in it because they don't like it as well as they do the cellulose.
One discussion point with the fiberglass versus cellulose is the fact that fiberglass does not perform as well with air movement through it. And since this is a vented attic, so this is another thing I was going to talk about, especially with these dark areas along the edges. There's soffit venting along the edges, and then there's some proper vent that comes up a little ways, but you do end up with a lot of air infiltration through the edges, and that's where then the fiberglass would not perform as well and it's almost nice to have that cap of cellulose, actually. And yes, it's sort of this give and take of, yes, you've got a little bit of less depth, but you end up with better air sealing that kind of caps the warmth in versus allowing it to escape. And if you look at the BPI, the Building Performance Institute standards that they've put out, they basically say that fiberglass insulation in an attic, they're degrading to more R2 per inch, R2.5 per inch, depending on how well it's installed because of that air movement. And it's a very valid point. So in a way, yeah, in walls, when you have that vacuum, it performs extremely well. But then in attics,
I've used that fiberglass in areas that were losing so much heat that they couldn't even open the doors of their house.
yeah.
And when I insulated it with that stuff, they actually put the wood stove on what they normally would. They had to open the doors because it was so hot in there. You know?
Well, that goes to show you that the house probably was not insulated before at all.
Yeah, exactly.
So any insulation at all is good.
Exactly. So, you know, but in most homes, I was using basically about 18 inches in an attic space, and they almost received almost a full of the heating bag, you know.
That's the whole thing. It's,
They
the
couldn't
attics,
believe
great.
attics and foundation lose about 60% of
But the cost is so minimal to reconstruction.
No, absolutely.
The payback is much sooner.
Okay,
Which
so
is why,
we got
yeah.
Get back, yeah.
Which is why we talked about the 20 to 30 year paybacks versus 6 years. And anyways, so and this is another thing, and because we didn't do a full mechanical audit, you know, this is something that a commissioning agency would be good to look at, just making sure that everything is optimized in terms of performance. You do have this ERV in your mechanical space, and I understand that it's providing makeup air and also helping cool it down. Used to overheat a lot. There used to, I think, be a server, lots of computers in here, so it really needed to be cooled down. There's also uninsulated hot water pipes and heating pipes in here, which is part of why it's also overheating. But this is something, you know, if this is running all the time, that's also using electricity, and there's some opportunity for savings there. In the 6-year payback scenario, we talked about upgrading attic insulation and air sealing, and there's a detail that would be similar to what we proposed for the library in terms of air sealing around the perimeter, that would prevent this type of dark, the heat loss around the edges due to the soft
You're
venting.
seeing air washing up the E-vents and essentially degrading the fiberglass insulation up there. Because it gets between the cracks. You can see each one of those darker lines there is the bottom quarter of the roof truss. So it's getting between the roof truss and getting between the fiberglass, and that's what's causing that heat loss across there. So it's washing across that.
And you can go to the next slide. And then this room over here. We were just looking at, okay, we heard this has trouble staying warm and I think also staying cool, but nothing too out of the ordinary. It probably has a lot to do with the distribution system again, but there were some areas like this right here ended up showing up much darker than the rest of the spaces. Is right up here above your heads. There were just some fiberglass bats that were up a little bit, and so there's a lot of electrical wiring and data cables and everything just running through your attic, and because the distribution system is up there too, it's what you're using, so there's the insulation is not performing as well as it could if there wasn't all this.
We found some of the big problems on projects. We had one project where the sprinkler head went off. We called up and said, you know, there's something wrong with the system. We found out that we had 2 feet of insulation up there, you know, cellulose insulation. You know, it was roughly an R55 or something attic. What happened is that they had put in a new cable system. An electrician had come up there and then pushed away all the insulation in a whole strip to lay his wire down, and then put the insulation back again, about that wide. And right below that were the sprinkler pipes. And then he left the door open to the attic. And you know, we find that what gets installed correctly the first time in attics, typically, you know, people come back and do retrofit work, and they do, you know, this and that up there, and they push the insulation away, they pull it out, they don't put it back in place again. So the real key is really monitoring carefully work that gets done whenever you have in the attic up here. You know, just make sure that, you know, when electricians are notorious for this, you know, we see that mostly with them and in attics, and just make sure that they do their work. You go back and have the insulation put back correctly, and it's done to meet the standards you had before.
And it seemed pretty good up here. There's just a lot more to contend with when you have a lot of distribution systems up there, so it's a challenge. So, and you can you can go to the next slide, please, and then back to the lighting. So here, there's also it's T12s, and they are the Super Saver bulbs, but they basically, the difference is they don't put out as much light, so therefore they don't use as much. And there's definitely a lot more efficient systems that can be used. I mean, I'm wondering in this space if you couldn't get away with a fixture here, fix that, if you had a more efficient fixture. And I did talk to somebody from Efficiency Maine just to kind of go through your buildings, and her eyes lit up and she was like, yeah, this is a great, you know, you guys have a great opportunity here to really look at this and collect some incentives and save some electricity. And even in this building, this is electronic ballasted, so it's not as much of a user as next door, but still great opportunities for savings here. You can go to the next slide. And this is just the summary again. Oh, fuzzy. So insulation around heating pipes. One thing is the night setback temperature. I was told that it's right around in the upper 60s still, and that's fairly high, and there's definitely some opportunities to set it down, especially because here it's actually programmed, and so very simple steps of really just looking at your settings when people are actually here, setting it down to 60 at night can result in great savings. And that's not a high investment at all. It's really, you have very knowledgeable people working here that you can talk to and just probably get that done. And yeah, the attic, big thing. The T8 upgrade for the lights and the hot water. Big thing actually in all of these buildings is just making sure that there are aerators too in the faucets, just for water consumption savings. I think that it's also an important natural resource and can help. If you're heating your water, you use less hot water.
And sort of like, just in general, because this building here, this section right here, the annex, really has a heating and cooling system. It's a little bit more, it's not just like having a boiler somewhere and having some baseboard. When it was built and designed, it was probably balanced. It probably hasn't been touched in like 10 or 11 years. And as part of all of this right here, I would probably have somebody come in and look at the system, make sure it's optimally, that the boilers are working correctly, that the fan coils are working correctly, that the distribution is working correctly, that in fact, the velocities at each one of your registers is correct, and that may help distribution in the building, along with everything else. As part of this whole process, that would be an important part of making sure that the system does operate correctly.
And I think we're moving on to the next one. The library, and it's my understanding that you'll be in this building for a while, so it makes sense to invest in this and make sure that it's comfortable. I did hear some concerns about the indoor air quality. I heard that staff do have allergies, and it gets stuffy in there, and it's not surprising with the basement. And I heard there's some moisture issues, so that's definitely something that can be addressed. Even really making sure that you have continuous vapor barriers down in the basement make a big difference. In some of because this back area here, there's some crawl spaces underneath that need some vapor barrier protection.
What that is if you have exposed dirt, in the basement, you have a tremendous vapor pressure from the soil moisture, and the way the physics of that works is that you have a space above it which has a lower humidity, a lower amount of moisture in the atmosphere, and the system will try to regulate itself, so it'll produce enough moisture, keep dumping enough moisture from down below, which is plenty of moisture in the ground, into that space to balance the system so that it's equal. So the tremendous, that's why basements in the summertime, you get the humidity in the basement, and you wonder why your shoes all get moldy. It's because you probably left the basement window open, and so you have 90-degree air that's really laden with humidity coming into the basement, which is probably about 55, 60 degrees, and then it's going to condense on something in the basement. So that's once again Mother Nature trying to balance its way out. So by preventing moisture from rising through vapor barriers and sealing the basement slab as best you can, you don't have that vapor pressure pushing in from the basement floor or from the walls. And also, you always want to close your basement windows in the summertime.
So you can go to the next slide, just giving you an overview. So there's the kids' room, the adults' books, and there's this bathroom back here, which is also used for storage. The areas that, so this main space is insulated with cellulose up above, but it's not a lot. I have it in the report, just a few inches. The one big thing here is the basement. There's a lot of exposed foundation around this perimeter, and this whole area is uninsulated. The exterior walls, actually you can go to the next slide. So this is again an overview, looking at electrical usage, heating usage. So this is also fairly high up there, especially for the fact that you don't use the building as much. It's open just part-time. And then I understand that people are very good about turning down the heat when it's not in use, so that's good. You can go to the next slide. So this is the uninsulated basement walls, and then, you know, the framing, and then anytime you have your gaps between your colder basement areas, and it really was much colder down here and up above, you have that air movement through, causing discomfort. And I heard also the library is very drafty and uncomfortable. People will use gloves certain days when it gets really cold in there. Occasionally even some space heaters, which is a big electrical draw. And really it would be much more efficient to use the main system to heat those spaces. And by insulating, you can increase the comfort levels by a lot. The boiler in this building, and this is a big thing, it's a steam heat system. And just because it's steam, going to hot water would often provides a 30% savings right there, which is a big savings right off the bat. And then another thing too, 40-gallon hot water tank, just again for 2 faucets in the building, which is again oversized and not necessary. So there are fairly affordable electric instant hot water heaters that can be installed.
Other than the on-demand systems, what's a more appropriate size tank if we're just doing 2 faucets? Because apparently that's probably have the one building.
Yeah, you know what, I don't want to give you an answer just off the cuff, and I'd check probably with our mechanical engineers. I don't know if you know off the top of your head.
You know, they make a 5-gallon unit. It's about that big around, and for washing your hands, that's all you really need. And the really issue isn't so much the size of it. Well, it is because you're heating a large volume of water, so you're keeping the large volume of water constantly warm for washing your hands once or twice or 3 times a day. And then you're transporting that warm water from the point to somewhere else with uninsulated pipes.
Yeah.
So you see the pipe leaving the hot water tank, it's uninsulated. And
Yeah,
so,
all of us.
so by the time it gets to the spot where you want it, you've done 2 things. You now let the water run until the water gets hot.
Through the cold basement.
The cold basement, so the water finally gets there, it's finally hot, and then you wash yourself, so you now they have that hot water in that pipe that's uninsulated sitting there, and it will heat the space. So I guess it's residual heating. That's why you'll see a lot of places will have below the sink, that they make these very small little electric on-demand hot water heaters, and they work very, very well. They plug in 110 volt, and they go fast. And they're very energy efficient. You go anywhere, most places in Europe, you go, and energy costs are twice what they are here, and you'll see those used. You know, they're very, very standard throughout, you know, the world, where energy costs are much higher than ours.
And one thing just to note, the server room was closed, and we opened up the door, and it was very warm in there. And that's probably just something that needs to be looked at to make sure that those machines don't overheat. I know there's a ceiling fan, but when that light is off and the ceiling fan is off, it just heats up still. So that's something where if there was a different type of ceiling fan, they have ones that run continuously, that might be an option. And actually the heat in here in the winter time, because it's dry heat from the machines, would actually maybe be a nice source of heat to have in your basement space. So maybe just put some louvers in the wall, or change how this vent can actually probably empty into your basement because it's not moisture. Usually try to exhaust moisture from bathrooms, but if it's just heat in here and that's going outside, that can really go into your basement. And this is a little detailed photo of the exterior foundation, showing that there's actually kind of 1.5 to 2 inches that the siding and the stud walls come out a little way. So if you're insulating the basement, which is a good idea, here's an opportunity to actually put it on the outside, put rigid insulation with some kind of a stucco covering, and flash and integrate all of that together. Because you already have that gap, and that creates a much more efficient shell And you can go to the next shot.
Okay.
And here's some details. Basement, I was just talking about that, putting some rigid insulation on the outside. It's really important to insulate these rim joists. And this, yes, fiberglass can be used, but it's really best to use something that also air seals, because this is a primary location for air infiltrated heat loss, basically. So this is your lowest portion, so cold air does want to come through, and warm air wants to escape. This is just talking about the attic. It would be good to upgrade here to an R49, and it's always really great to air seal the edges, and we've been doing, because oftentimes because of the venting at the edges, cold air will want to kind of wind wash through the fiberglass and degrade the value of that. We've been suggesting spray foam just around the edges, just to create that seal, just a tiny bit, and that just helps make the other insulation perform much better in
You
these
can
other
imagine,
areas.
it's like a break in there. So, it holds the insulation in place, but it also, it allows then the air that you use to cool your attic to go right past. You don't get any backwashing. And you
Flip
also
right over.
make sure that the vents, the proper vents go up high enough so you don't get back curling. You know, but the air, so if you get standing wind on a building, a 25, 30 mile an hour wind, what'll happen will go up the eaves, they'll go into the eaves, into the eave vents, and wash into the building. And as it washes the building, it curls around, and it disturbs the insulation. You know, it pushes the insulation around as it's trying to find its way out the top.
And you can go to the next slide. Just this shows the infrared scans of the exterior walls. So settled at least a third way down, sometimes even more. So all of these bays are uninsulated. And so they actually filling that with more cellulose. It's cellulose currently, so you should definitely stick with cellulose. It's not a good idea to mix different
Depends
types.
on what that is. You know, they did use blown-in fiberglass 10, 15 years ago. It's also settled. It was an issue with both fiberglass and cellulose insulation. And they have now for cellulose they have a thing called dense pack. And what they do is they put the insulation in at a certain density, which prevents it from collapsing. And the same thing you do with batt insulation in the walls. You know, my office has that, my old office has the blown-in bats, which is fiberglass. It has like a latex binder to it. So when if you can imagine, it dries almost, not rigid, but sort of fluffed up, and it stays fluffed up, it doesn't settle. And so you have to, when you insulate a wall like this, you can't put, if you've got fiberglass in, you can't put cellulose in there. And if you have cellulose in, you can't put fiberglass, and you have to kind of keep it the same type of insulation. So you have to go in there and then do some testing.
Except for in open attics where you can put cellulose over fiberglass, because it's not an issue of condensation happening in any area that it shouldn't. You can go to the next slide. Also, this is the little side room in the front, just showing some air infiltration around the windows. And then, again, this is the front, this is the little space in the front, and there's, again, kind of showing you the settled insulation. You can go to the next slide. And then this is the back room, and there's kind of this tongue and groove, and then there are these vents, which I'm sure cause a lot of warm air to escape right into the area that should be insulated, and I hear there are also ice damming issues in the back. And again, just because you have all these gaps, you have a lot of heat loss, and Pete from your maintenance area has done some improvements. There's two rooms, so one of them got this R-value acoustic tile ceiling, and that's helped, I guess, the comfort levels a lot. And this is kind of due for an upgrade. So here, I mean, this definitely works, but it doesn't provide the air sealing. So ideally, you'd really create a continuous, just some rigid insulation with some gypsum wallboard, and you have your insulation and your air sealing in there, and it would prevent a lot of that warm air from escaping out the top. And there's definitely some opportunities to use the space a little better. I think it's a more storage space, but anyways, you can, and actually lighting, again, T12's opportunity with efficiency main. This is the attic. Cellulose up here. Always important before doing additional air sealing, just additional insulation, just to make sure that the air sealing is done correctly. So around the eaves, as we talked about, but also where there's studs coming through the ceiling like this, those are oftentimes they're oftentimes interior walls that are not insulated, and they're oftentimes open in the basement. And so it's a good idea to really block it off in the basement, block it off at the top of the attic first, and then insulate over top to make sure that you don't have this like shaft chimney of colder air going through the interior of your building. You can go to the next slide. And yeah, lighting, as I talked about. Don't want to repeat myself. And so big things here, definitely the boiler, switching to a hot water system versus steam. And I know that will require a new distribution system, but because of the high savings and it kind of the comfort challenges in the library, and if you're going to be there for a while, this would be an investment for the future. And then the health concerns that were brought to me in terms of just indoor air quality. There is a requirement for mechanical systems to bring in fresh air, and heat recovery units are a very efficient way of doing that. And so basically bringing in fresh air, and you can actually, if you're providing a new system, you can combine those two.
Right, it could be a ducted system, heating and cooling system.
So you can kill two birds with one stone, fresh air and heat and air conditioning, actually. And again, programmable thermostats, there were none there, they were just manual, and yes, people were setting them down, but with programmable, oftentimes you can set the temperature down even lower, and then it'll slowly ramp up if it knows, okay, you're going to be coming in, then it's just that much easier. Sometimes paddle fans, because it's a tall space, pushing the warm air down, supplement cooling as well in the summertime if you switch the blades. And definitely before you do any more air sealing and insulation, definitely the moisture control. And there were just some notes about that in the report. That's very important because you do not want to put your structure or the health at risk because you're sealing up the building more first. And that's, and then, attic and the walls, big things here.
As you can see, there's typical themes throughout here.
Yeah, so that, that's,
This one should be easy, though.
What's that?
This one should be easy.
right.
Well, yeah, that's, you can put it that way.
The big thing here is it was constructed a long time ago, and I mean it was constructed, I think, not necessarily
As a garage.
to be used for so long, and it sounds like there's some concerns in terms of how it's used. You have to back in with the trucks, which is a safety concern. There's no exhaust system, which is a health concern. You have this apartment here, and along, and we can just take a look at some photos if you go to the next slide. Definitely, I'm not sure, this is not completely all the energy use yet for this year, I understand, and there seems to be a big dive. I'm not sure what happened here, but that's good. But it still uses a lot. It's higher BTU per square foot usage, and it's a garage that's not fully heated to the comfort level either. So you can go to the next slide. Just to show you some concerns. So basically all around the edge of this building, there's this concrete sill, which is uninsulated concrete, so it's an R1, and then you have your walls.
So once
But-
again, going back to this whole concept of where does the energy go? So typically,
That's right.
old garages would have, they turn up the sill, you have concrete sill all the way around, you put your cleaner on top of that and build on top of that. In this case here, you have no thermal break between the interior slab and the outside concrete wall. So you have essentially a perfect thermal bridge to the outside. So that what happens is if you look at that with an infrared camera,
Actually, you can go to the next slide. I think
You'll
there's another
see,
picture.
you'll see what I'm talking about.
Yeah, kind of here,
what you'll
colder.
see is, if
Maybe
you
the next
imagine that exposed concrete right in the space. So the zero outside would be 10 degrees on the inside. But what's even more hideous is that carries back into the space because the concrete floor will carry it back in until it warms up. So you have not just the vertical piece, but the horizontal piece, which is a cold bridge, which essentially is continuously pushing cold air, warm air out. It's trying to balance itself.
And yeah, it's just the tongue and groove sheathing on the inside, definitely lots of air leakage. I'm sure had we done a blower door test, which was not part of what we were doing here, we would have gotten phenomenal air changes per hour. You've got hot water pipes along the exterior wall, along this very cold band here, and the snow water is very hot. I don't know if it's set to the regulation is 140 degrees, but that means you're also wasting a lot of water that's too hot. So there can be scald prevention devices that kind of mix it down a little bit. At least that way you're not wasting as much hot water. And this right here is the infrared image of the exterior. So you see the difference in temperature, 67 to 45 degrees. And this was not a very cold day. I think this was, it wasn't even freezing that day. I think it was in the 40s. I have it in my notes somewhere. But yeah, so, and the attic is insulated. You can go to the next slide, please. Oh, here again, this is in the garage, and definitely lots of, because I think the trucks are in there and it's so tight, they're not quite tall enough, these spaces. You know, you have all of these funky framing details and more air infiltration to your attic, which, you know, to make it efficient, all this should be sealed. And the garage doors, of course, they're never going to be very well air sealed. That's just unfortunately, the nature of garage doors. But
The building basically has sort of met its lifespan.
yeah, and the thing is, though, we could suggest lots of things. We could suggest lots of things and say, yeah, you can insulate the attic more and insulate the walls more and do all this air sealing, and but then you kind of look at, okay, is this building really functioning how you need it to function for your
You
town?
have to back in, a vehicle like that costs that much money, and you're worried about ripping off, a light up above. You start having to think about letting air on the tires to pull the thing in and out of there. You start getting worried about that. And we've dealt with other towers that have the same problem. When they back in, and the doors aren't high enough, they add bigger doors and they can't do it anymore.
And then you have to, because you don't have an exhaust system, you have to keep the garage doors open for hours to make sure that all the carbon monoxide escapes in time.
And the walls, the walls have got rotted, the studs are rotten.
Yeah, we were told that through this last phase, the whole south side siding was redone, and we were told most of the studs needed to be sistered up, and there was a lot of rot, and the fiberglass was put in, and then you kind of look at the wall, and it sort of does this, and that then means that there's a lot of air moving through, and it's going to just go through the fiberglass, which means the insulation isn't going to do you a lot of good. So, we have a hard time suggesting, okay, put this much more money into it for a building that, we don't know what your plan is for the future. Is this really going to be what you want to put your money into right now? And I know that you need something there. It's important for the town to have that, but there might be better ways to invest that money.
This may be an important capital improvement item.
Yes.
So a good thing they didn't go down to North Station, huh?
Yeah. I think the fire chief is listening in here, and kind of
Oh,
clapping.
yeah. Yeah, so it needs a lot more help than just energy upgrades, unfortunately. Maybe go to the next slide. I think, yeah, so this shows the exterior wall. I mean, this is just, it's wavy because of the structure, existing structure and the, the fixes over time. And I know this isn't done, but when you have these gaps and then you're just going to put trim over it, you're still going to have a lot of air leakage and heat loss, and it's not ideal. You can go to the next slide, please. And the attic. One thing here, this is not good. Both the bathroom exhaust fan and the dryer exhaust exit into the attic space, which is a lot of moisture and heat that you don't want in your attic. Not good for the structure either. And then there's just lots of these gaps. This is the little space above the bedroom that's kind of tacked on the back. And there's all these gaps, and with the infrared camera, it was just kind of lighting up. There's all this warm air coming up through the floor and around the edges. And yeah, you could air seal that, but like I said before, it might not be the best investment. You can go to the next slide, please. And light fixtures. This is one example right here. This thing was kind of on. It was very dim. And it was, I'm sure, using just as much electricity as, these 4 bulbs need, but it wasn't actually putting off any light, and that thing can just be taken down. I don't think it's working anymore. The ballasts must have gone bad, and the lamps.
Those do tend to burn with time.
Yeah, and so that's, and again, there was kind of a mixture of magnetic and electronic ballasts, so upgrades, again, efficiency main is really, is a good source here for improving your lighting. And that's something where if you met with an electrician who's gone through the process before with efficiency main, some of these projects might make sense to put in just the new ballast and the new lamps, but in some locations it makes sense to just put in a new fixture. In areas where you can kind of decrease the number of fixtures, you can really look at, all right, let's put in a new fixture and kind of rearrange the lighting plan a little bit and really optimize it for the space. So, and maybe last slide. So here we didn't go through the priority sequence. We didn't really think that was appropriate. So it's just a discussion point, and hopefully.
I didn't have a code that reflected the negativity of it.
Yeah.
Well,
there's a lot of information here. It's some technical, it's some visual, but I think you understand some of the common themes that go through here. Each building has sort of its unique sort of existence, and there's a whole range of things that can be done with each one of them. Something like the fire station probably should be a capital improvement plan. In my town, I work on that, so I know what it's like. I sit over there sometimes, and I have in the past. So I know this is something you have to plan for. And some of the costs here, range from doing a few things, to address issues that are really important. Some of the things you have to make long-term decisions on, and this, the report here gives you a good sort of analysis of what you have. And it allows you to go in and then say, we're going to attack that, and that. And then you can go after those things more specifically. And then spend your money wisely. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. How can you spend your money wisely and get the most sort of dollar for your investment? And this is kind of the first step in going towards that. So, questions? A lot of information, sorry about that.
It was a lot of information. We all got the audit last week, so we've had the week to kind of look it over and digest it, and I think that there's some great recommendations in here on some low-cost things. I mean, insulating piping, how much really is it going to cost us to do something like that, and we're going to see some return on that investment right away. And then I think there's absolutely some things here that we need to really look at long-term planning for. I know our staff has said that you were wonderful to work with, so thank you very much. Appreciate the excellent job that you did and all the information that you've given us and for coming in and making a great presentation tonight.
Well, and thank you also to everybody that helped provide information and lead us around and answer questions, and so that was great too. It was great help.
Anything else?
I was impressed by the professionalism of the report as well.
Thank you. Happy to do
Thank
it.
you very much.
Good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to next on the agenda, hearing a delegation.
May I?
Michael.
I